Have news that immigration data is not being stored. This is former Tory Minister Neil O'Brien outlining that he's written to the ONS asking for information on how data related to immigration is kept, is stored and is gathered. And the answers were a little bit disturbing, weren't they, Stella?
Yeah, so apparently there is no answer. They are not taking care of this data. They don't know, they're not noting them down. We don't know exactly why. We don't know exactly whether this was a conscious decision or whether what my hunch would be is that because of all of the money that they basically don't have, that this is just one less thing for them to do. Bureaucracy does take a lot of funds and a lot of time and resources from staff members. However, it seems like this minister is very concerned because obviously this is vital data and a lot of people would be interested in it because what they want to know is basically, to be quite blunt, are immigrants more likely to commit crimes? Are immigrants more likely to be repeat offenders? Are immigrants more likely to be prisoners? And you know what? I actually, as a person who is broadly pro-immigration, I think, yeah, you should have this data because if you know how many immigrants end up in prison, you might find out an answer that surprises you, which is what we know from other countries, that immigrants very often are less likely to commit crimes, especially violent crimes, than other than the nationals of the country where they are residing, for the very simple reasons that immigrants very often will want to be in their best behavior, especially first generation immigrants, because they don't want to be deported, they don't want to be sent back, and they are very well aware of the fact that they will be if they are not in their best behavior. And you know what, while you're at it, and we're talking about government data, and it is very important to know who is in our prisons, because it means that it allows us to connect the dots of what leads someone to become a person who commits crimes. And there is a campaign that Terry Galloway is a person who has care experience from our care system, and his campaign is to make care experience a protected characteristic, because basically that will mean that, you know, for example, you will be able to check the box and know how many people with care experience are in our prisons, and this because it will allow you to see how the policy you are the policies that you're implementing at one area of social policy, how that impacts other policy areas, for example, prisons. So on the one hand, I think that this Tory minister will be, you know, he's not going to necessarily get the answer he likes if we do start gathering this data, but he's raising some very important questions, and I do think that the ONS and the civil service should have an answer for him.
Reem, what do you think? I mean, data is king, right?
Well, indeed. And I think what's interesting about this is that, you know, of course, you were making particular assumptions about, you know, where these people particularly might come from, what kind of crimes they might be committing itself. The ONS published data and figures on immigration, both illegal and legal, very, very regularly. And so the fact that we don't have, you know, the sort of full story behind this data is, I think, really interesting, almost rather scandalous. I mean, you know, to think about the way in which the government are trying to reduce illegal migration, we're trying to have a kind of wider perspective on where these migrants come from and indeed what they do when they get here, how much of those people are actually contributing to the economy, how many of those people are indeed, you know, being very overrepresented in prisons, which we know that ethnic minorities tend to be in the first instance. I think it's really interesting. Of course, it's not necessarily the government's fault itself. It's part of ONS figures, and whether or not the ONS have something to answer for. I think the ONS have a lot to answer for in general. Some of their statistics aren't always using particularly correct methodology. There's been a couple of studies recently about the ONS's stats on GDP growth. So I think what's interesting is the ONS seemed to have been making a couple of mistakes over the last few years, and this does kind of bring into question how we look at statistics overall in this country. I mean, we look at the ONS as though they are this kind of god when it comes to statistics, and we kind of follow what they say. I mean, even in my job, we look at the ONS statistics on GDP growth all the time, but actually overall there seem to be a couple of mistakes being made, and clearly very big holes in these kind of very, very important evidence-based policy making, and ultimately the government can't be making evidence-based policy making without that evidence.
Well, that's the point. I mean, immigration is such a hot topic for the government. It's right at the forefront of people's minds at the moment. There's so many different pieces of legislation coming through to try and tackle the problem of illegal migration, and yet we don't have the numbers. It's absolutely mad, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think one thing that people will say is a lot of people are worried that the government is not being honest about their intentions when it comes to immigration, because very often they will have a lot of pressure, specifically from business. They will have a lot of pressure from several industries to have all of this, to create all of these loopholes, to get immigrants in, whether you think that this is because they want cheap labor or whether it is because, which is also an answer that I favor, which is that a lot of British people don't want to take the jobs that the vacancies.
There are 5.3 million people on out of work benefits. Clearly, if we have a conversation about where these people are going, and actually, if we want to see GDP growth, we need those jobs filled. I mean, you're absolutely right. Lord Wolfson, I think it was a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago, the CEO of Next was calling out for more immigration because he was saying, how am I going to be filling these vacancies without the people in this country that are going to fill up those jobs? Now, when you've got huge numbers of people on out of work benefits, I mean, I think that's particularly scandalous in itself. And then you have restrictions on legal migration. So those people that are coming here illegally cannot work whilst they're on waiting lists. So they're forced to be reliant on other taxpayers. And then ultimately, you've got businesses that are struggling to grow, that can't fill vacancies. I mean, if we're talking about this word growth that Chancellor Jeremy Hunt seems to be particularly interested in, if we're talking about growth, we cannot achieve growth without people working. And ultimately, there seems to be an issue here where the government are subsidising people to stay at home whilst also restricting migration from abroad.
Well, a good solution would be for business leaders to make working conditions better, and that will, I'm afraid, mean that they will have to work with the unions and allow, workers will have to be able to join unions, and it will just mean raising the salaries that they're paying these workers, making sure that the only jobs that they offer are not on exploitative 0-hour contracts.
0-hour contracts are not necessarily exploitative.
Not necessarily. You're quite right. I'm not going to say that.
I think they can be quite a good fit for students and things, can't they?
Yeah. I mean, when I was a student, I wouldn't have been able to work at all if I didn't have a 0-hour contract.
Yeah, but for a lot of people, it does mean that a lot of these jobs are of lower status these days, and they are not considered jobs that people can do long term. Because, as you say, you did this job as a student, so if you actually
and mothers and people that have care needs that might be required to stay at home often. So I mean, 0-hour contracts. I really do think that this tends to be this was a Labour Party policy. I'm not sure if it is anymore. I think that was scrapped along with Jeremy Corbyn. But when it comes to 0-hour contracts and allowing people that flexibility, I think the interesting point that you raise is that there needs to be this kind of flexibility. And I'm actually not totally hated of unions. I think unions can be fine when they're negotiated freely with employers. Take Sweden, for example. Sweden has no minimum wage. They have no minimum wage laws, but unions and employers negotiate freely. And that then means that working conditions and pay is able to be negotiated freely without the interference of government. In this country, unions have effectively been able to lobby for special privileges, which means they often do have a huge hold. The majority of union members are in the public sector. So again, they're not able to negotiate with their employer because their employer is the government. And so I really do think that there needs to be a huge workaround of the way in which we look at labour statistics. That's partly the ONS's fault, but also the way in which we think about immigration and the way in which immigration is there to effectively do those jobs that unfortunately British people seem to not want to do.
Let's get some calls in on this. Do get in touch with us. Give us a call on 03444 499 1000. Drop us a text to 87222 starting your message with the word talk. Now, I want to come on to that point you raised there, Reem, about those who are seeking asylum in the country not being able to work, because we do have job vacancies and quite intense shortages in some industries. Do you think that the government should actually legislate to allow people to take those jobs so that they can contribute towards their own kind of living costs, etc.?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that we are effectively forcing people who come to this country who are on the asylum seeker backlog. Now, the asylum seekers backlog has gone up from about 100,000 in the summer of 2022 to 170,000. I'm sure it's even higher than that, but those are the official statistics. So I think what's interesting about this is that we seem to be thinking that actually, we want to be restricting illegal migration. We don't want these people to come to this country in the first place. But when they are here, we're forcing them to be reliant on taxpayers. And then you see, I mean, we've all seen it on Twitter, right? When people say, "Oh, I've seen this illegal immigrant driving a Deliveroo takeaway." You know what? Let them. I mean, why do we want them to be reliant on those jobs and reliant on the taxpayer and reliant on really what the government give them is an absolute pittance? And we're effectively wanting them to be idle. Actually, I think that the proper solution should be, allowing those people to work. The gig economy is fantastic. I mean, you really don't need to speak very good English at all to be delivering takeaways. I have absolutely no issue with an illegal migrant or an asylum seeker delivering my Indian takeaway on a Sunday night. I have no issue with that. And if they're able to earn more money and therefore ultimately be able to be less alarm going off, be less reliant on taxpayers, but also then be able to earn more money and actually contribute to the economy, I think that's a brilliant thing.
Is that the alarm to let you know that your takeaway's on its way?
My takeaway's on the way. Let's see which illegal migrant will deliver
Absolutely.
today.
Stella, what do you reckon?
Yes, I completely agree with you, Reem. I think a lot of people will say that, if you do allow them to take up jobs, then this will incentivize them to come. But they are already coming. It's already increasing. And what do you have as a result? You have this massive backlog that the government is unwilling to take care of. And I think that there is an incentive there to not speed up the backlog. I'm not sure exactly what is the long-term strategy. My fear is that there isn't one. But at the same time, you're looking at all of these measures that we have been taking for all of these years, and what have we achieved? We haven't achieved anything. So you may as well actually put these people to work, because many of them will eventually end up staying here anyway. And you look at some of the numbers, which I can't remember now off the top of my head, but you look at the numbers of how much all of this system is costing the taxpayer, and it's absolutely insane. Surely there are better ways to spend our money.
And I think it's a very conservative policy, might I add. I mean, we want people to be working, and ultimately giving them the right to work in this country, I think, is the best way forward. And I think the fear seems to be, and I think this is an ungrounded fear, that as soon as we allow people to start working in this country from abroad, they're going to undercut British workers and they're going to reduce pay. There's actually been proven this is not the case at all. The more people we have working here, the more businesses open up, the more people that have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And I think, and I really hope that our callers aren't terribly offended by when I say this, but I think that many people in this country are just far too lazy. And when we've got 5.3 million people on out-of-work benefits, now either that is a health scandal, and that also is a scandal in itself and needs to be dealt with, or there are a lot of people that absolutely shouldn't be on benefits but are. Now, there are again many people that should be on benefits that aren't, but I think that overall the system seems to be unworkable. There are clearly people in this country that can work but aren't. Part of it, again, I do think, so many of this uptake was after the pandemic, with a lot of mental health crises, and a lot of people then claiming that they were too sick to work as a result of their mental health. Now, I think that, mental health issues itself, they can definitely result in people being unable to work, and I think those should be taken very, very seriously. But also, and Lord Peter Lilly makes this point very well. He effectively argues that many people, when they do end up being on benefits in the first instance, and they're already suffering from depression or other mental health issues, but I think depression is the most common, they end up sort of going through this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where actually they feel as though they're not contributing, they already feel down as it is, and actually they just go into an even deeper depression. So I don't necessarily blame them. I'm not necessarily saying all of those people are lazy, but I think we need to have a wider conversation, not only just about public finances, but about the huge waste of human potential that this really, really is. I mean, there are people out there that aren't working, that could be contributing to society, that could be doing the best thing for themselves, but they aren't. And so we're having this entirely toxic political conversation about immigration, when really the problem seems to be more domestic.
Well, how do we tackle this? Looking at it from a government perspective, clearly the welfare state and benefits are there as a safety net to protect the most vulnerable people when they need it, and some people with really intense long-term illnesses clearly need that route. How do you draw the line between being suspicious of those who might be perhaps exploiting the system whilst also protecting those who really are vulnerable? It's really tough, isn't it? And have we got that balance right, Stella?
The thing is, I think that I'm worried about where the welfare debate is going in the UK, because I think a lot of people are identifying the personality of whole cohorts of people, of a whole generation, as a policy problem. And this really, I do not think that this... I think it is highly unlikely that that's the case. I think it's highly unlikely that it's simply that this generation has a worse character than the one that came before it, and that people who are on benefits right now are simply just not as good people. I think the problem with blaming someone who is already on benefits and making it harder for them to access these benefits, which is what has been the dominant policy narrative so far, and it does seem it does seems to me that there are a lot of conservative politicians who believe if only you made it difficult enough for people to go on benefits, then they will suddenly become the kind of people who go out and get jobs that can be quite physically demanding and mentally not stimulating, but actually mentally demanding as well, because some of these jobs can be really, you need to be healthy both in mind and spirit to do, like those that include like being a social care worker, for example. You really need to be in a robust mental state to do these jobs. And the problem is that unless you provide an environment for people to become well, to truly become well physically and mentally and address their issues, which will include investing in their mental health, investing in their housing, I think that we are underestimating how much of an impact the cost of living crisis and the housing crisis is having on people's mental and physical health, both of these things. Because if you are not able to eat well, to socialize, you are worried about where you will be living month after month, year after year. If every 6 months you have to move, and then wherever you have to move, you are going to a viewing for a flat that costs double the price it cost like 5 years ago to rent, and there are like another 20 people, and you don't have a job, or you have a really poor paying job, and everything is more expensive than it used to be, then it is very likely that your health is going to, it will take a toll on your health. And I think that we are sleepwalking into an even bigger crisis, because it seems to be that we are suggesting that just by being stricter and tougher on these people, that they will magically become better. But the problem is that a lot of these people are growing older. Their physical ailments are going to become long-term. From short-term, they will become long-term. And we simply don't have right now an NHS and a social care system that is able to take care of their needs. This is why I think it's very important in policy, and I've already mentioned it and I will continue to mention it. You need to be connecting the dots. Yeah. You need to be seeing how cuts in one department...
Looking at the root cause, and I wouldn't necessarily
this is why that data is so important that we were talking about right at the beginning.
Well, absolutely. I think that particularly just with the story, the fact that we don't have the full information, the full data around, the way in which people are acting in this country in the first instance, I think is a problem. I would probably disagree with your sort of solution to the problem, but I do think you're right. I mean, look, the housing crisis is probably my favourite topic to discuss.
I've never heard you mention it.
I know, never mentioned the housing crisis. But look, I mean, even the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, the fact that people in this country are finding things too unaffordable, actually the root cause tends to be government red tape and restrictions. I mean, just looking at the housing crisis, for example, the root cause of the housing crisis really is economics 101. If you want prices to come down, you have to increase supply. You have to be building more houses. And ultimately, there seems to be perverse political incentives that mean that many Conservative Party voters tend to be homeowners, and many of them also tend to be NIMBYs, people that don't want houses being built in their area. But if we want, I think this is more a political point for the party, but if the government want to see a new sort of generation of young property-owning Conservative voters, they need to be rethinking, and instead of at the moment they seem to be thinking about the short term, and you've got the triple lock on pensions and of course huge amounts of money being spent on housing benefit. Instead, actually looking at the root cause of the problem, looking at the long-term solution, which is building more homes. The rest of the cost of living crisis, I mean, looking at the fact that many things are unaffordable at the moment. Many job restrictions, for example, require licensing. I believe licensing for occupations has increased significantly over the last few years. Solution to that, again, is allowing employers to hire people without allowing them to make the decisions rather than government making the decisions for them. I think people in business know better than government.
I